Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Joe and Kat Chats. Today we are going to be talking about mental health, self-care, and the political sphere. What all of that has to do with our current circumstances, politically, economically, you know, and socially. So I'm just going to add Joe. Hopefully, Joe. Hello.
Hey sister, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing what I know how to do. I'm in a public space at a campsite right now. I have to wear a mask because those are the rules. So, in honor of all of those who are consistently fighting for Black Lives Matter, I'm wearing this mask today. I can't breathe. Those are the last words said by George Floyd. Those are the last words said by Eric Garner. So, I'm wearing this mask in full representation of them and continuing in the fight and the struggle for humanity, equality, freedom, and survival. And I know that is a hell of an answer to give you on a Tuesday, but it is what it is. I'm feeling it today.
That's great. No, I
How are you?
appreciate it. And safety first. And you know what?
Yes, ma'am.
You're
Safety
keeping others
first.
safe by wearing that mask. So I very
Exactly.
much
Exactly.
appreciate it.
I know. And then long distance too, I mean, we're talking about social distancing, but I don't really like the term social distancing because that means it sounds whack. I'd much rather physically distance than social distance.
Yep,
So that's what it is.
sure.
And I see you're all nicely coiffed today and made up. What's the occasion? Or
You
is
know
it just,
what?
hey, Tuesday afternoon, I'm feeling
Just
it.
Tuesday afternoon, feeling it, talking about mental health. And you know what? Thought I'd throw on a pop of color, some lipstick.
Exactly. Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Nicely done. Nicely done. Awesome. Awesome. So we are talking today about mental health, self-care.
Hmm.
There's a lot of this going on and a lot of this needs to be talked about because quite frankly, we're in a weird time. And I live in a country that ties healthcare to your job. And there's a whole lot of people that just lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. And there's a whole lot of people that are like, okay, damn, how do I take care of myself? What do I do? What? And this sort of ties into the conversation we had a while back about healthcare, because so much of healthcare is tied to preventive care and being able to care for yourself so situations that you have don't become chronic situations, don't become worse as they get along. There's an old adage, a stitch in time saves nine. So that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that if there is a problem, we address it before the problem becomes an issue.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, in the interest of keeping things sort of the way that we've been doing them for the last few weeks, I
Yes,
wanted to define these terms before
absolutely.
we even start.
I
So,
like that. I like that.
yeah. So, mental health is a person's condition with regard to their psychological, emotional, and social well being. So, it
Hmm.
impacts how we think, we feel, and we act.
Yes,
So there's
absolutely.
a lot involved in that.
There
But I
absolutely
think
is.
it's also important to look at sort of the reverse or the reason why our mental health might be impacted, which is mental illness. And what that
Okay.
is a disturbance or disturbances in thoughts, feelings, and or perceptions that affect
Hmm.
your day-to-day functioning. And
Hmm.
so there is a huge range of like severity.
Of course
And it
there is. Yeah.
includes things like anxiety and mood disorders like depression, which are the two sort of most common mental illnesses.
Then
And
panic, stress, phobias, shame, guilt, grief, uncertainty, secondary traumatization, post-traumatic stress disorder, all of that affects your
absolutely.
mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, when we're looking at this stuff, it's certainly more common than most people, I think, would think. About 1 in 5 Canadians experience a mental health problem in any given year, and it's about
Mm.
the same in the US.
I'm sure it is. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so, and the one important thing I wanted to mention with that is it doesn't mean the same people are experiencing mental health distress in that, across time. It can affect anybody at any point. Um, and so, yeah, it's pretty universal. Like we all have mental health and we all have to maintain it. And it's something that can be disturbed or brought on in an illness way, I guess.
Exactly.
You know, given our life situation and life events.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. And a couple, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, you go ahead.
Oh, and I know you said mental health and you defined what mental health is, but you know me, I always like taking things apart and then putting it back together again. What does it mean to have mental? What does that word mean? Mental. It's like mental. Okay, it's your mind. It's disorders of the mind. It's everything that's going on up here. And the other part of that word is health. What is health? And it's the state of physical, psychological, or mental well-being. It's all of that. So when you talk about mental health, which is the state of psychological well-being or an absence of a mental illness, that's exactly what that mental health exactly is. And again, part of the reason why I love starting these conversations with deconstructing what these terms are, because usually when you put these terminologies together, they're always greater than the sum of their parts.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so true.
Right. And you know
So,
what? We speak the truth here. This is
yeah,
what Joe and Cat Chats is all about. We speak the
always.
truth. We don't lie to anybody out
Yeah,
here. No. For what? Why
no
would we want to
way.
do that? No way. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I know,
Exactly.
Kat, there's, we're talking about self-care and we talked about mental illness. We talked about mental health. I had to look this part up because I wasn't really sure. I kind of guessed, but then I was like, okay, you know what? Brother needs to do some research. So I did a little research. There are 5 different types of self-care. You have physical,
Hmm.
emotional, spiritual, psychological, and professional. I think I got 3 and then I kind of guessed the 4th, but I didn't think professional self-care would be one of them. But I guess professional self-care is even more applicable now for those who are working and for those who are frontline workers. And how do you deal with, for example, being a critical care nurse and having to deal with being in a hospital and working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and you get one day off? And you have to consistently see people dying because of the coronavirus. Or you have to tell family members that your loved one is dead because of the virus and you couldn't see them and you couldn't say, hey, I love you, thank you for being my dad or my mom, or I love you, whatever. You couldn't give your last regards. How do you take care of yourself? How do you deal with that? How do you avoid these sort of traumatizing events over and over and over again? And what's so interesting about this topic is because my thesis for my second master's degree involved secondary traumatization for strategies for dealing with secondary traumatization for healthcare interpreters who were working with traumatized people. And there really wasn't a whole lot of literature about that specific topic. But so much of the self-care examples that I'm sure you and I will discuss had application to my thesis from 2 years ago. And some of the examples are exercise. You know what? Get out, lift the weights, jump some rope, toss a kettlebell around, go for a walk around the lake, do some burpees or some squats or some push-ups or some sit-ups. I mean, I'm sure you're probably like, well, Joe, what is all this? Well, I do that stuff all the time because that's how it comes out so easy. Get some good sleep. Sleep it up. Get good 7 or 8 hours of rest. If you got to wear earplugs, wear some earplugs. If you've got an eye mask, wear an eye mask. If you need to have a warm glass of milk, get your warm glass of milk. Take some Ambien, whatever. Get some good sleep. Eat a good diet. Don't go eating cheesecake before you go to bed. That's just, no, that's not cool. Go on vacation. Get away from it. I
Yeah.
mean, here I am at a campsite, but I haven't really gotten away from it because I can't get away from me, but I could get away from Baltimore, which that's good enough for right now. Go outside, breathe some fresh air. I usually could typically work out at the lake every day, and now I'm working out outside here because that's what I need to do. Get some fresh air, breathe in and breathe out. Read a
Absolutely.
book.
Yeah.
Read a book. I mean,
Be
look at all the books I'm reading, look at all the books you're reading. Read something. Turn off the TV because it's just pile of misinformation. And books are soul food. TV is junk food.
Hmm. Yeah,
You
that's so
know,
true.
just yeah, just stay off that. Stay off that. I know this one will be close to your heart. You have a lovely dog named Onus. Get a pet.
Yeah.
Pets are great ways to have self-care because when you come home and Onus jumps in your lap or jumps on top of you because Onus is a big dog, you're like, oh, Onus, yay, I love you, Onus. And you go outside and you toss the ball around and you take Onus for a walk and everything. So get a pet. Be selfish with your self-care time. It's your time. You need it. No one's going to care more about you than you will for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
No matter
that's so
who,
true.
no matter who you're with that says that they love you. No, you got to get that time for you because you need it. If your life is scattered and you're just like, oh my gosh, I have so much going on, I don't know what to do, get organized. Get organized. Clean up your apartment, clean your house, have a filing system for your bills, set reminders in your phone so you can stay on task and on schedule. That
That's the
sort of
one I
stuff.
need help with right now.
Oh
I've just
gosh.
been so busy, and scattered is a good
I'm
word for it. But but yeah, no, I
yeah,
totally agree. I think
yeah.
some of the examples I wrote down were you've already mentioned them, like just
Uh-huh.
a regular workout routine. I walk my dog. I like to put on some music sometimes in the evening and just have a dance party in my living room.
Yeah.
That's good for my mental, my physical, and my spiritual self. Like
Oh, I
absolutely.
know. Absolutely.
So
And I know you're listening to those Joe Nice mixtapes. I know you are. I
always.
know you got it turned up loud. I know it. I know it. So yeah, you got to have those mixed CDs in. You got to have those in. You got to get that in. Another way to kind of have good self-care, yoga.
Oh yeah, and
Yoga.
meditation as well.
I was just going to say mindful
Hmm.
meditation, and that's
Hmm.
like right there. Mindful meditation. Yeah, yoga, mindful meditation. On a professional level, mentorship.
Mm,
Because there's
yeah.
plenty of times you're in a work situation where you're like, yo, you know what? I don't know how to deal with my boss. I don't know how to deal with this particular situation here at work. I've got clients that are really being weird. I got this person over here that, they don't know how to talk to me the right way or whatever. How do I deal with these situations? Find a mentor. Have a support group.
Hmm.
Have a support group. Part of we talked about this maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago with regards to comparing racists and saying, hey, can you be a reformed racist? And we compared that to being an alcoholic or a drug abuser. And the answer we came up with through, I guess, some sort of really deep thought was no, you can't be a reformed racist. You can't be a recovered alcoholic or a recovered drug addict because you're always working to be not a drug addict or not an alcohol abuser or not racist or anti-racist. That sort of situation applies with having some sort of support group because when you have support that could help you to not be in a state where you have mental illness, there are strength in numbers. That's where that phrase comes from, strength in numbers. So the stronger your group is, the stronger your community is, the stronger you will be to deal with these sort of mental illnesses and mental problems, and the better self care you're able to have as a result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness, yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, I had a note here. Where was it? It was, I mean, I basically just want to reiterate what you just said by saying, like, you need to check in with yourself, um, but you also need to check in with others in your community
Sure
and check
enough.
on
Mm-hmm.
others in your community, because that's the only way that we're
Yep.
going to be able to really maintain this work and move forward with ourselves and our in our well-being in a holistic sense, uh,
Correct.
in order to change it or do
Correct.
whatever you want to do with your time. So yeah, it's so important to really understand how to disconnect from like the stresses you're experiencing and really just be in the moment with yourself and do things for yourself, whether
Mm-hmm.
they're small. I mean, whether it's eating a salad every day just to get some
Absolutely.
vegetables in your body, or if it's, you
Exactly.
know, having a bath, a bubble bath, or
Yes.
doing one of your hobbies and just disconnecting. And to speak
Hmm.
to the example you used earlier, having an animal, even like dogs are a lot of work. I have to walk him and pay attention to him a lot. But even if you have a cat,
Yes.
like it's so nice that the cat just comes and you can take a moment and like disconnect from what you're doing to like
Hmm.
scratch the cat or pet them or
Yes.
whatever.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's
Yeah.
lovely. And those
It,
things
it,
are
it
so
is lovely.
important.
They are so important. And something, and Catherine, you mentioned the word community. The main word in community is unity.
Mm-hmm.
Unity, meaning togetherness. So again, having people around you, they might not necessarily be your neighbors or coworkers. They could be people who you chat with on Instagram, or people you keep in touch with because you've traveled around and you've kept in touch with them and you check on them every couple of days. Hey, what's going on? How's work? How you doing? How's your parents? How are you? How's your baby girl? How's your dog? How's your cat? How's your mom? How's work? How's the office? Did you get your car fixed? Whatever. You know, it's those sorts of you're not trying to be nosy because that's not what it's about. You're just trying to show that you care, because
Mm-hmm.
showing that you care about somebody else is a reflection on your ability to have self-care.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It's a show of compassion for the people that you do care about in your life.
Yes.
And like you said, whether it's your neighbor or if it's someone, across the world, those little check-ins that you can
Hmm.
do with yourself and for other people, they make such a
Yes.
big difference,
Huge
especially if
difference.
somebody is maybe having a hard time because they're stressed out or,
Hmm.
impacted by the pandemic because they lost their job or
Yes.
impacted because their job got a lot more stressful, like the nurses you or healthcare workers
Yes.
in general, you
Yes.
mentioned before. And
Or,
so,
or
yeah, these
service
little
delivery
things.
people.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're all overworked now, considerably more overworked, and they're wondering, okay, damn, and if I go to work, am I going to be risking my life?
Hmm.
Is this $18 an hour really? Oh shucks, sorry about that. Is this $18 an hour really worth it? Is it really worth my life? I don't know. So people got to deal with that, and again, that's sort of self care. Cooking for yourself is another one.
Hmm.
If you have a job, use your sick time. It's yours. Use it. Use it. There's always, you have your sick leave and then you have PTO, paid time off. Use it, because employers want employees to be of sound mind, body, and spirit. Because employees of sound mind, body, and spirit are most effective and the best at their jobs. They're able to deal with disappointment. They're able to multitask easier. They're able to focus when it's time to focus. They're able to handle more tasks and more responsibility as the jobs continue to grow. So self-care is a big deal. It's a huge
Yes.
deal.
Hmm.
It's a big deal. And I'm happy we're
Yeah.
talking about this.
Me too. Yeah, yeah. And I think that self care is such a big conversation right now and sort of a buzzword,
Mm-hmm.
but it
Mm-hmm.
is sort of an aspect of mental health and
It
having
is.
to really take care of yourself in
Mm-hmm.
all senses of that word.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah. So,
Yes.
um, okay. So the next part of this, I wanted to bring up some sort of uh, political stuff
Fire
because I
away. I'm up
think
for
I
it.
yeah, so I think that mental health is an important conversation that we've kind of been having a lot more recently in the news media,
Agreed.
in the political rhetoric a lot
Agreed.
more lately. And so
Absolutely.
I kind of want to examine that. So basically, mental health has been sort of at the forefront of these conversations for good
Yes.
reason and some tragic ones. So the
course.
pandemic and police abolition conversations are kind of forcing the politicians in Canada to actually
Mhm.
address this issue and
That's
talk about
nice.
it, which is,
That's
yeah,
good.
which is something that is happening that, or sorry, something that is not happening necessarily for you down in the USA.
No, no. There's nothing happening with the
Mm-hmm.
politicians in the United States. Nothing. The politicians, the Republicans can't figure out which stimulus package they can figure out to agree to before they negotiate with the Democrats. So, yikes,
Yeah, yeah.
yikes,
So,
yikes. We're in trouble.
yeah, yeah, it's,
Big trouble.
yeah. So I think that it's important to highlight sort of the differences because Trudeau in Canada here announced more funding for virtual mental health
Oh, that's
resources,
nice. Okay.
including launching a website called Wellness Together Canada, which I will link in the notes.
That's awesome. Thank
Um,
you.
and so that happened in early May. He announced that, and it's up
Hmm.
and running now. And I think it's an important thing to mention because um, like traditionally, mental health has been a lot harder to access in Canada than physical health because healthcare here is universal
Yes.
and single payer system.
Yes.
And so mental health has always been sort of outside of that realm unless you have additional insurance through your job.
Interesting.
So it's
Okay.
financially not like covered by our healthcare system. And so
Hmm.
now like this has launched like a free resource. Although I haven't used it myself, I'm assuming it's like okay. I'm not sure how extensive it is.
Sure.
Um, so, but it is free for everyone. So yeah, so I think
That's
that's an
good.
important yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, but the other thing I wanted to mention was what they're missing in this conversation,
Okay.
because I also find that there's a lot left unsaid and a lot left unaddressed when
Sure.
these initiatives come about.
Okay.
And I have a quote by uh, Chewan Chenika, which is, quote, often we speak about mental health as if it is neutral,
Mm.
in, and in doing so, ignore the role of culture, the social determinants of health, and how identity
Mm.
based issues like racism takes a
Yes.
huge toll on the mental health and well being of people. End
Absolutely.
quote.
Yes. My gosh. Catherine, Catherine, please read that again. Could you
Yeah.
read that again so everybody watching right now and later on tonight and tomorrow and next week and the week after that really digests everything you just said in that quote?
Yeah, it's a good
Please.
one. I'm so glad I
Eh,
found this one.
yeah, it's delicious. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
hear that one again, please.
So we often speak about mental health as if it
Hmm.
is neutral. And in doing so, we
Right?
ignore the role of culture, the social determinants of health, and how identity based issues like racism takes a huge toll on the mental health and well being of people.
Mm. Wow. That is a brilliant quote. And you know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of the quote that I had a couple of weeks ago um, about race by
Mm,
Dr. David Lee, where he says, and I quote, race is not a thing, but a relationship. Race is biological irrelevance with fatal social consequences.
yeah, yeah.
The social determinants of health are relationship based. They're all interconnected.
Mhm.
The quote you just mentioned talked about racism and talks about how racism plays a role in your mental health. And again, Dr. David Lee's quote, the English professor from the University of Oregon, race is not a thing, but a relationship. You just said in your quote, it's not neutral, meaning it's not a thing. It is a real, viable, living, breathing organism.
Mhm.
Race is biological irrelevance with fatal social consequences. We're talking about mental health. If you don't take care of your mental health and your self care, That is a fatal social consequence.
Mm-hmm.
The fatality could be you. The fatality could be a coworker. The fatality could be a relative. The fatality may not necessarily be a physical death, but a spiritual death or an emotional death or a psychological death. Doesn't necessarily have to be fatality in the literal sense of the word. I hope everybody understands how deep and how potent your quote actually is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I hope so too. Yeah, it really impacted me when I read it, and I was like, oh my goodness, I have
That
to.
quote's as
Yeah,
deep as the Pacific Ocean.
yeah,
My gosh.
yeah.
Extra deep.
Yeah. So going even further,
Yes,
so I was looking at sort of mental health in the BIPOC community, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color, just in case
absolutely.
anybody doesn't know that term.
Yes.
Uh, it's informed by racism, discrimination, and trauma. So racism plays a role in Black people's vulnerability to mental health distress and
Mm-hmm.
in their reluctance to seek treatment. So
Yes.
when I read that, I was thinking, like, yeah, like structural racism means you're
Mm-hmm.
living in a system that opposes your existence.
Correct.
How wouldn't that impact your mental health?
Absolutely.
And then you
Absolutely.
add things like you were just saying, you add things like over policing in Black and brown neighborhoods. You
Mm-hmm.
add things which leads to involvement in the prison industrial complex.
Absolutely.
You add things like poverty, housing
Yes.
discrimination, food
Mm-hmm.
deserts, stigma, everything else. We've talked about these issues in the last
Absolutely.
9 weeks.
Yes.
Uh,
There's a
yeah,
pattern.
there's absolutely a pattern. Yeah,
There is
yeah,
a pattern. Absolutely. There is
yeah.
a
So
pattern.
no wonder BIPOC folks tend to have longer lasting mental health issues or
And
problems.
chronic health issues. And in addition
Yeah.
to that, Catherine, undiagnosed or misdiagnosed mental health issues. And I know I mentioned this a while back in our discussion on healthcare. There is a phenomenon called the Tuskegee effect. The
Yeah.
Tuskegee effect happens when Black people and people of color are less reluctant to seek out medical care, especially medical care administered by a white person, because of the Tuskegee experiment in Tuskegee, Alabama, syphilis, you know the rest. So if Black people are less likely to go to the doctor because, you know what, my knee's sore, or, you know, my shoulder doesn't work the right way, or I got this pain in my chest, or, you know what, I've been breathing a little heavy, and those are physical maladies you can actually feel or may in some instance see, because you might have a swollen knee, or you might have a toenail that looks a little bit darker than the other ones, and oh, it's bruised, I didn't realize that. Why would you think of going to a therapist for something that you can't see, for something that
Such
you
a good
can't
point.
see?
Yeah.
And this, what I'm going to say next is going to maybe a bit of a reach, but I know where I'm going to go with this. I will argue that Black people in the 60s, or 50s, 60s, and 70s probably sought out mental health more back then than they did now.
Mm.
Why? Back then in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the racism was obvious. There were colored seats, white people. There were Black people, drinking fountains for Black people, drinking fountains for white people. Oh, you know what? It was only 65 or 70 years ago that Black people were forced to sit in the back of the bus. The racism was obvious. So as a result, it was easy. You could see the problem, and part of being able to fix the problem is being able to see what the problem actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, fast forward to times we're in now. Maybe not right this minute because the racism is obvious again, but maybe let's say 5 to 10 or maybe 15 years ago. The racism wasn't as obvious. So the term microaggressions would be there, but it's, you know what, the microaggressions it's abuse, but you don't really feel it the same way because it's a bee sting rather than a bullet. And I'm going to say that again. It's a bee sting rather than a bullet, but you still feel the pain, but the pain's not as deep. So you're now like, you know what? You walk into a room, for example, and I've had this happen. You you walk into a room full of white people, and you can't see the racism, but you can feel it. I'm going to say that again. You can't see the racism because there's not a seat telling me, oh, Joe, you're black. You got to sit in the back of the classroom. There's not a sign telling me, oh, well, Joe, you can't drink out of that water fountain because that's for white people only. I can't see the racism, but I can feel it. And that sort of confusion plays on the mind. And that sort of power dynamic in terms of racism is even more insidious than what was happening probably in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Because when the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you could see the racism, okay, I could confront it. But how could you confront something you can't see? That's true power. Because power is always felt, power is never seen. Mm-hmm. You can't see an earthquake, but you can feel the tremors underneath your feet. You can't see a tornado, but you can see the cows and the silos and the farm equipment blowing in the wind. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
If you're lucky enough, you might see the thunderbolt, but you feel the shake of the earth after the thunderbolt hits the ground, and then the lightning bolt, and then you feel the thunder and the sound. You feel it. Again, that's what racism and power added to racism, white power added to racism. That's how it affects black people's minds on a far more insidious level than cops beating the hell out of black people in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Because, okay, shit, we can see that. We can deal with that. But what happens when you're a black person and you're twice as qualified as the white person, but you don't get that job and you're wondering, what did I do? What the fuck? How come
No,
do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think this is a really actually important thing that you've brought up, and an important comparison, because
Yes.
as you were speaking about sort of the 50s, 60s, and 70s about racism being obvious, and people potentially seeking more help back then because it was more obvious, it
Yes.
made me sort of question my idea of what seeking mental health means. Because our conception, at least my conception right now, is like seeking a therapist. That's like the professionalized way of seeking mental health help. But
Sure.
I don't think that that's always been, well, historically it's been a white man, Freudian style, like you sit and he imposes his whatever mentality upon you. So that's not always been, and still remains, an inaccessible way in a lot of ways to access mental health help.
Absolutely. Sure.
And so my work is often surrounding community, and I think that there's something to be said about how possibly back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the sense of community was probably a lot stronger.
Absolutely.
And yeah, because I mean, the racism was so obvious. And I think
Correct.
that the way that urbanization has been happening in our cities has disconnected us and created this sort of individualistic, I mean, we live in an individualistic society anyway,
Agreed.
but I think that the cities and the structures and the urbanization of these places has greatly contributed to isolation in a way
Yes.
over the last 25 years that
Hmm.
is really making this conversation so sort of topical, because we've lost our sense of community
We have.
in the urbanization of our societies.
Yes. Yes.
So
We've lost our sense of community in the urbanization of our societies. And additionally, Catherine, this is probably the reason now, because the racism has become considerably more obvious now because of the orange guy in the White House. And quite honestly, your guy in Ottawa,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, quite honestly, your guy in Ottawa, the racism has become considerably more obvious. So now, because in my opinion, or maybe not necessarily opinion, but quite honestly, fact, look what's happening in Portland, look what's happening in Washington, D.C. The racism has become more obvious. The discussion on mental health and seeking mental health and self-care has come to the forefront again. This is probably the reason why Justin Trudeau in Canada created that website, because he, in his own backhanded sort of way, knows that he's contributing to the racism. So he's like, you know what? Let me try to help fix this also, because yeah, I fucked up, but let me try to do something with this.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike here in the United States, it's just like, you're already on your own anyway. So now you're really on your own, and now you know you're on your own. So this is probably one of the self-care topics we discussed was yoga. We discussed that. Maybe that's a really good reason as to why there are a whole bunch of people doing yoga at Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the reason why. Because maybe that's the reason why, and this is another self-care method, and I've used this from time to time, and I mentioned this in my thesis from 2 years ago, aromatherapy. Aromatherapy. It's a great way to, if you smell something different, it does something to your mind. And the sense of smell is such a strong, powerful sense. It's just like, you know what? You remember what grandma's cookies smelled like out of the oven, right? You remember when a guy walks by or a lady walks by, it's like, wow, she smells good or he smells good.
I have lavender
There you
oil on my
go.
desk.
There you go. There you
Yeah.
go. There you go. I can't tell you how many protests I've been to where people have been marching with bundles of sage,
Mm.
fully lit, walking around, and I'm smelling burnt sage while it's no justice, no peace, no racist police. Okay,
Yeah. It's been
so
sweetgrass here in Canada because we have an
sweetgrass.
Afro-Indigenous community that is at all the
Mm-hmm.
rallies, and it's lovely. There's always ceremony happening, and it's
Yeah,
lovely to see that and to know that the organizers and everyone involved are taking care of themselves by doing ceremony, usually at the
yes.
start and at the end of
Mm-hmm.
events.
And that sort of self-care and self-help, especially now because the racism has become considerably more obvious, it's it's the reason why we're seeing these activities at protests. It's the reason why your country has a website to address mental health and self-care. It's the reason why there's going to be potentially more money added for healthcare and on the state level with regard to the next stimulus package. Catherine, it's the reason why you and I are having this conversation on Instagram.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, that was so well said. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're
Oh my
welcome.
goodness. And yeah,
So,
I think this conversation is just I think it's interesting because there's so many nuances. Like
there
I
are.
said before, we live already in an individualistic society, but
Sure
it
do.
is interesting to sort of compare the sort of images of ourselves that we portray. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that America is very individualistic, like, Second Amendment, we do this, like, and Canada's taken a bit of a different approach as far as, I mean, in the pandemic, like the mask issue,
Yep.
whether to wear one or not, has sort of
Absolutely.
been more of a collectivist circumstance. And we've got this like socialist healthcare system here. It's based in
Mm-hmm.
socialism, and
Absolutely.
so yeah, we do have these things sort of popping up that differentiate us. But I do think it is still very important to understand that these are sort of just gestures, because, like you said earlier, Trudeau is not actually doing anything to address the racism in our country, and he's
No.
actually perpetuating it as the prime
He absolutely
minister.
is. He absolutely
So,
is.
yeah, so these gestures are kind of, I don't know, I guess just
Perfunctory.
symbolic. Yeah.
perfunctory. I love using this
Yeah.
word. It's perfunctory.
I love it.
Yeah, but that's what it is. They're perfunctory gestures. They're symbolic. It's theater.
Hmm.
It's quite honestly, it's pro wrestling. It's pro wrestling. That's really what it is. Because you see two wrestlers in the ring. It's a good guy, bad guy. The outcome's already scripted. But backstage, everybody's buddy buddy. Everybody's like, "Hey, great match. It's all good. Good move. I'll let you win the next one on the next city." It's all pro wrestling. It's all theater. It's all show. It's shambolic. Everybody understands this. Everybody understands this. And and this kind of leads to the next topic. We got about maybe 20 minutes or so left. But what I wanted to make sure that we address before we move on to the politics part of this discussion is, what does good mental health look like? What does it look like? And Catherine, part of what good mental health looks like is being able to feel good about yourself. You wake up in the morning, you're like, yeah, let's go. It's a great day. It's Tuesday. I'm going to work out. I'm going to toss the kettlebell around. I'm going to do 1,000 rope skips. I'm going to have a nice breakfast. I'm going to drink my protein shake. I'm going to walk your dog. You're going to go to work. Hey, you get to talk to your brother Joe. Joe and Cat chat today at 3:30. Yeah, it's going to be a great day. It's awesome. It's awesome. Good mental health is feeling comfortable around other people. It's feeling like, you know what? Last week we talked about diversity and inclusion. We talked about that when we said diversity is being asked to dance and inclusion is being asked to dance. And the external factor is liking the music that's being played so you can dance to it. Being comfortable in your space and in your own skin is a great side of mental health. Because and I'm sure this is maybe the same case for you, but I know I've been in plenty of spaces and around people who only feel comfortable when they make you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's really, really terrible.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
That's gross. That's just a gross thing to do to
That's
someone.
just whack. It's whack all the way around. Good mental health is self-respect, self-dignity, pride. You feel good about yourself. You respect other people also. That's good mental health. Long-lasting relationships, healthy relationships that are built on love and honesty and trust and respect. You don't diminish somebody else's character to build up yours. You don't blow out somebody else's candle to make your light shine a bit brighter. Though that's what good mental health is about. You can laugh at yourself. You can make other people laugh. There's an old adage, laughter is the best medicine. And I love a good joke just like the next person. I love laughing. See, you're doing it now.
Me too. Yeah, me too. It's great.
You're doing it now. You self-determination is a good sign of mental health. Being able to do what you want when you want. Having choices and options in your life. That's good mental health. Being able to make your own decisions. It's like, you know what? I feel like having pasta tonight. I don't feel like having a pad thai. Okay, go for it. You can do it. Great. What if you can't have that pasta tonight because the Italian restaurant's closed down the street? Being able to deal with disappointments. It's like, oh, damn it. You know what? Luigi's is shut down. Okay, I'll just settle for the pad thai. No problem. Okay? That's okay. Just because something doesn't go your way doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It doesn't mean that your life is over and it's a catastrophe and a disaster. That's what good mental health looks like. And I think it's important that we all understand that, because now more than ever, we're dealing with more uncertainty. We're dealing with more disappointment. We're dealing with more what's going to happen next. And being in a place where you can feel good about yourself to deal with the everyday stresses that life is a part of is mental health. because we only have one mind, we only have one spirit, and we only have one life. And, if you live it right, once is enough.
Yeah, that's so true. Oh my goodness.
If you live it right, once is enough.
Yeah. Yeah, my goodness. There's a lot to think about there. I think it's a lot. There's a lot involved in being able to maintain your own sense of self and
Yeah.
maintain, your sense of, I
Identity.
guess, identity. Yeah, identity, and just like enjoying your life the way, however you can.
Yes,
Yeah.
identity.
Mm,
Because you remember our very first conversation, humanity, freedom, equality, and survival. And, you know, equality. Wait a minute. They're getting all this money. I'm not getting anything. What about my job? And again, I said in my speech about 2 months ago at the Black Lives Matter rally, your job gives so many people a sense of purpose, a sense of being, or that French phrase, raison d'etre,
mm,
who you are. And now people don't have their jobs anymore.
mhm.
And now they've got to figure out what they're going to do and who they're going to be for the foreseeable future. And that is going to play on people's minds.
For
And
sure.
that challenge of personal and professional reinvention is
Hmm.
going to take a lot of mental energy for a lot of people.
Hmm.
And that's something that I think is going to eventually be discussed. And the last point that I want to make with regards to good mental health, and it ties into that professional and personal reinvention that many of us are going to have to deal with, is to shape your own environment,
Mm.
to manifest, is to create the life that you want as best as you can possibly do it. My uncle told me this years ago, and my uncle Ansel, he would say, Jojo. He always called me Jojo, right? Because my dad's name is Joe, so he called me Jojo. And and he said this phrase when I was about 10 or 11. He said, you have to create your own gravity. And I was like, what? Create your own gravity. And what he meant by that, now that I'm 44 years old, is you have to create the energy that you want in your life. You have to create that sort of gravitational pull of what you need in your orbit, in your system, in your solar system, in your personal environment, in your personal ecology, in your personal community. Create your own gravity. I never understood that when I was 11. I understood that, gosh, 25 years later. So now we can talk about it in these sorts of conversations. But good mental health means to create your own gravity. It means, you know what? This is what I want to do, and I'm going to do this.
Hmm.
I'm going to go to school and get a master's degree like you did. Or I'm going to go to school and get a master's degree like me. And then
Or
for the hell of
two.
it, get another one. Because you know what? That's because I can.
Hmm.
Create your own gravity. Do your own thing. Be yourself. Oscar Wilde once said, be yourself. Everyone else is already taken.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that that is such a beautiful way of sort of putting putting all of this into words, in the sense that like self-reflection too is something
Absolutely.
that I really
Excuse me.
have been privileged to have the time to do in the last couple
Yes.
of years, and that has really helped me maintain my mental health,
Mhm.
in a positive way. Um, and yeah, so your your own gravity.
Create your own
Yeah,
gravity.
I love
Yes.
that. Yeah,
Me
that's very
too.
cool.
I've never
Yeah.
forgotten it. Create your own gravity.
Mm.
We have about 8 or 9 minutes left
We
because I've
do,
got the
yeah.
Google timer on here.
Hmm.
I know we wanted to talk about politics and mental health and how it deals with politics. So I know you had some topics you wanted to bring up. So fire away, please.
Yeah, so just to sort of transition through, I think that there is, a sense of self and self-awareness, and these processes like we were just talking
Yes.
about
Hmm.
are so important for us and our communities,
Absolutely.
whoever's in your life. But the reality is that, there's still, uh, you know, things like poverty and things like racism and things like whatever else. We've been talking about all of these issues for several weeks, and
Yes,
these are still aspects of the physical world that we have to deal with all of the time.
they are.
And so I wanted to actually bring up the topic of wellness checks. And I don't know, I was going to ask you if you know whether police do wellness checks in the US and what that entails if they do. And just to explain sort of what that is when someone calls 911 in crisis in Canada,
Hmm.
uh, they try to determine what the issue is, and then if they determine it is a mental health issue or something along those lines, or someone's in crisis and they don't know what to do, whether they can determine if it's mental health or not, they will
Yes.
send police to check on this person. And
Hmm.
it's termed this wellness check because they're trying to figure out what the crisis situation is, whether it's dangerous, etc., etc.
Right.
So do you know if that's a thing that happens in the US as well?
Catherine, I don't know, but I can give you an example of a situation that I was involved with about a week or two ago. I was on my way to play soccer on a Sunday morning, and on the street I was driving down, it's a relatively small street, and I saw the car door open on this car. So I'm like, okay, damn, car door's open. Let me move a little bit to the right so I don't hit the car. And then I drive by slow, and I see a guy sleeping, slumped over, sleeping in the car. So I'm like, and it's Sunday morning. I don't want to honk the horn, wake everybody up in the neighborhood. So I'm like, yo, you all right? You all right? No response. Yo, can you hear me? No response. Like, shit. Okay. Let me call 311, which is the non-emergency number. 311's like, no, you got to call 911. I'm like, oh, Jesus. Okay. I called 911 and I was like, look, there's a gentleman slumped over, kind of, he might be asleep. Can you tell if he's asleep? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't get out of my car. Can you? It was just this long conversation with the 911 operator, and I was like, look, this doesn't need to be necessarily a police situation. Could you please send an ambulance? I think this gentleman is just passed out behind the wheel of his car. Maybe he's asleep. I don't know. This doesn't need to be a police situation. So me being me and not wanting something crazy to happen, I waited around. And the first person to show up was a police officer. So I flagged the police officer down and I said, yo, sir, I was the one that called the cop. I was the one that called for this gentleman over here. He appears to be asleep behind the wheel of his car. Maybe had a long night. I don't know. I just want to make sure he's okay. He's like, okay, I'll check it out. Guy gets out of his car. The next 30 seconds later, an ambulance shows up. And I'm like, thank God, because that's what I wanted to see first was an ambulance rather than a cop. Because let's not forget, Rashard Brooks was asleep in Atlanta, Georgia, behind the wheel of his car, and he ended up getting shot and killed by two Atlanta police officers. When if a couple of medics had shown up, Rashard Brooks would still be able to go to Wendy's and get that bacon double cheeseburger and those really good Wendy's milkshakes. He would be still able to do that. So part of the reason why I decided to stay back was, you know what? And the cop was white. The last thing I want to see is white cop, black guy sleeping behind the wheel of his car. God knows what can happen. Ambulance shows up, then the fire department, a fire truck shows up right behind the ambulance. I'm like, okay, chances are this guy's going to be okay. And then cop knocked on the window. Oh, it was like, okay, yeah. The guy woke up, and I was like, okay, thank God, the guy woke up. But wellness checks, I don't know how prevalent they are in the United States, but I guess given the situation with Rashard Brooks, probably not.
I Yeah, and it might just be different verbiage because it does kind of sound like they are responding. Like cops tend to be the first responders in any situation,
Right.
and so it could be just like a verbiage thing. But
Sure.
the words wellness check have been in the news a lot lately here in Canada
Hmm.
because of the many folks that have been suffering from mental health issues or
Absolutely.
problems, and the cops are the first responders in these situations, and a lot of times they end up in murder for no reason.
Yes.
On April 6th, DeAndre Campbell, he was only
Hmm.
26 years old. He was a black man with schizophrenia, and he
Yep.
was murdered by police.
Yep.
May 27th, Regis Korchinski Paquette was 29 years old, just a few years younger than I am.
Hmm.
Black Indigenous woman was murdered by police. She fell off of her balcony because she was
I
experiencing
vividly
mental
remember
health.
that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually
Yes.
attended this public service and a march in her honor on the
Yes. I
weekend.
remember that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a situation that I saw in the news in Canada recently. It was, gosh, I think the brother was Indian or Pakistani, and the daughter called for a wellness check for the father, and the father ended up dead. And so I was like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Ijaz Choudhury, on June
that's exactly it.
20th,
Yes.
62 years old, person of color. He had
Yes.
schizophrenia. He was
Hmm.
murdered by police minutes. Actually, I feel like it was seconds. It was very shortly after they entered the premises, even though they spoke to one of his family members as they were entering the situation.
The daughter,
Uh, yeah,
who I think was
and
15 years old.
they expressed that the cop being there would make it worse because that
Yeah.
person was afraid of guns. There's
Yeah.
I there's so many examples of this happening, and I
Hmm.
think that these wellness checks, as they're called in Canada, are just sort of a pretty, terminology for, or just a catchphrase for people to be talking about these issues when
Right.
people are dying because they have mental health issues and are being responded to by thugs with guns that are employed by the state.
Correct.
So I think that's an important issue here that we need to be continuing to have a conversation about because we've only got about 2 minutes left right now.
We got about 2 minutes left. Yeah.
Yeah.
Catherine, this was another robust and vibrant conversation. So thank you again. This was awesome. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that we do these conversations each week because we care. We care about each of you, and we want each of you to be the best versions of yourself. And, if you like what we do, share it. If you don't like what we do, tell us, talk to us, email us. We're not hard to find. We're ubiquitous. We're all over Instagram. We're sharing stuff left and right on a minute, an hour, and day by day basis. So we're not hard to find. We're around. We're available. And we're here for each of you. And we do this because we care, and sharing is caring.
Heck yes. Oh my goodness. All of that. Just oh my goodness.
Sharing
Thank
is
you,
caring.
Joe. You've been such an inspiration and such a great person to be doing these chats with.
Oh,
It's been such a pleasure, and
pleasure's all mine,
I'm
honestly.
so
I
happy we're
appreciate
going
it.
to continue. Oh,
Yes, ma'am.
thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And next week, and we got about how much time do we have? About a minute left or
A
so?
minute, yeah.
Minute? Okay. We've got about a minute left. Next week, we're going to talk about schools.
Hmm.
Um, my ex-wife was a middle school teacher, then a middle school principal. And she talked about instruction, classroom instruction. She's always said that the best teachers have control of the room. What happens now when the room is Zoom?
Hmm.
What happens when the room is Zoom? We're going to talk about that next week. Schools during the pandemic.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited. It's going to be another interesting episode of Joe and Cat Chats.
Oh gosh, absolutely. Another interesting episode of Joe and Cat Chats. That's the buzzer, and it looks like we got to go.
We do.
Yes,
All
ma'am.
right. I love you so much. You
Love you
take
too,
care of
darling.
yourself and do some self
Mwah.
care today.
Oh yes, absolutely. It's beach time.
Oh yeah. Enjoy.
Ow! Yes, ma'am. Take care. Peace.
You too.
Right on.
Much
Bye.
love.
Mwah. You're the best. Bye.